why this time, 2011, 2012, is significant. What do you get
Oh
out of
yeah.
your research, and why?
Well, that's a tremendous subject. It really is. Basically, if you can look at it from the Maya point of view, or you can just dip into normal astrology. I've always likened it to sort of an age of an awakening for several reasons. One is the Maya actually said that, or the prophecy relates to that this is a certain finishing time or conclusion time. I'm not a believer in anything to do with catastrophe. I think that's another dead end. This is often a millennial thing that happens. But the underlying principle of the occult astrology that's connected with our times basically talks about it as an end of a phase of consciousness, an end of a phase of humanity, if you will. And this doesn't bode well, because that end of humanity could literally be that, and then we enter into the age of the machine man. You see, this is my worry, and it's going to be central to the talk that I'm doing down in Australia. That talk, Posthumanism, Age of Manipulation, is part of a series, part of 3 talks. This is the first one, first installment. So it's about this unfolding of this era being not an era of cataclysm in the physical sense, but a cataclysm psychologically, culturally, and of course even theologically, philosophically, and so on, that we are changing what we are in the most core levels of our being, in our levels of understanding, critical ability, judgment, what it really means to be human. And the reason why we are doing that, which these prophecies have said time and time again, is that man is living on the surface of himself, man is a mystery to himself, and primarily man does not want to look at his so-called darker emotions. And even when he does, he has a very negative relationship with those emotions, or perhaps he'll only do it through some sort of surrogate means to look at it, like taking drugs or something like that, in which he opens up these portals of his mind. We had that happen in the 60s, and we have a new cult of it, a new sort of Dionysian cult today, with this ayahuasca nonsense and all the rest of it. So this is inauthentic ways. People give them nice fancy titles and terms, but this is nothing more than another ruse created for, you might as well, it's no more different than the same cult that creates the physical medications, from the FDA, AMA, and the whole of these other leviathans. It's no different. It's just two hands serving the same brain.
Well, it sounds like you're saying that this time is significant, but it's one in which the outcome could, you're not sort of saying we're talking about an awakening here where we become spiritually, awake and grow. You think we're actually perhaps devolving?
Well, I don't believe in a we, first of all. So the question needs to be sort of rephrased in a way. I do believe that there will be an awakening for those individuals who have, like, remember we said earlier on about being shaken up, but the waking up process is a personal. So there's no doubt in my mind, I talk to them every day, that there are individuals out there who are deeply passionate about change. They have zero tolerance for the lie. They have the guts to do what is required to continue the journey. Obviously, there's nothing but awakening for them. In fact, their life is one entire, perpetual rite of passage and one perpetual awakening process. However, the other group that might have been shaken up, but have no real interest in waking up, and who have no interest in doing what we're talking about, the real sacred work, the holy work of looking within themselves for the answers. Yeah, then those people, and unfortunately they are the masses, they're not going to go anywhere. They're going to, in fact, have several reactions to this incoming plutonic light, if you will, Pluto being, again, a reference to these prophecies, because right now the planet Pluto is very operative in what's going on a social level. And so even though the potential is there for social awakening, so to speak, although Pluto and Uranus, the kind of archetypes that are working today, are again more about the shake-up. If you really want to be factual about astrology, unfortunately a lot of people are not being factual about it, they're making too broad statements. Those archetypes, those planet archetypes, shake things up. And by shaking things up, they primarily shake up the Saturnian and the Martian and even some of the solar embedded traditional approaches, and perspectives. But what that does is it gives the person then, it's just like sort of been loosening up from your chains, but you don't need to get up out of the prison and walk out. The door may be flung open, an earthquake may have happened and the whole prison is destroyed, but that doesn't still mean you've got up and walk outside the gates to be free. So there's still a little bit of a journey to go, in which the awakening process must continue. Now that, I believe, only happens on an individual level by people who have an innate understanding of where to go to find that information, what to read, who to listen to, and so on, and what to do with it. And then the rest of the people who are sitting there going, tell me what to do. Well, that's not going to create any change. The whole change is about you finding out what you're about in your own individual life. I've said in previous interviews, that consciousness has been left at the door by almost every single person in this alternative movement. Not all, granted, but I would say I can still, even though I might give concession that some people still deal with consciousness, unfortunately they don't deal with the darker aspect of consciousness. So, I'm probably the only one in this movement that not only deals with consciousness per se, but with the darker aspect of consciousness, which is where this is all about. Because we're not going to be whole people unless we understand this whole psychological dynamic of what we don't face ourselves and what we do to avoid facing ourselves. I'm totally aware of what people do to distract themselves. And I include in that the religions of the world and the New Age movement and many other things even in this movement. Distraction I'm fully aware of, but I know them as distraction. The individual is not awakened until they themselves embody the Holy Spirit, embody the light in themselves. Don't need it from external sources. And so this growing up period of maturity for individuals, spiritual, psychological maturity, or I've also described it as a sort of psychic sovereignty or psychic immunity, where no pathogenic force can enter your consciousness because you're so strong, based on this martial arts principle that when you yourself are so inherently strong, right, that your enemy can't defeat you, well then you've won. But fighting the enemy with the tools that they've offered you, and fighting them along with a lot of other people equally disempowered and misguided as yourself, how could that possibly logically create change in the world? It never has done, and it never will.
So what do you think of this current global Occupy movement? What do you think that represents, and where do you think that could go?
I don't have any interest in that. I think that these things I'm glad to see if they make some topical changes, or maybe on the lower street level, some injustices are corrected. I'm all for that. And it's not that I don't believe in the power of a group. Let's be factual about that. There's certainly enormous power in a group of well-meaning people. But when I speak of people being psychologically infirm or psychologically undeveloped, and that's what I do see. And I've seen it in all the movements of all the world. Never has there been a movement. The one thing about coming together as a crowd is you not only maximize the power to do good, but you also maximize the power to misuse the power. In other words, like William Blake, the English poet, said, that fist that crushes the tyrant's head becomes a tyrant in his stead. So unfortunately, in these movements of change, you find out that the group that takes over and douses one, gives the knockout blow to one form of tyranny, often sets up another kind of tyranny afterwards. And so the person who's really studied these matters has very little faith in these movements at all, because we understand that those well-meaning individuals, if you will, there's been centuries of them, I'm open to the fact that our time might be different in the sense that we have more learning now. Our forefathers, when they rose up with sword and fire, were drastically less educated in the architecture of power than, say, the people today. So I say that the changes that could happen today have one thing that never was in the past, which is learning, understanding of the matrix of power. We're far more up to speed on this than we ever have been in the past, and that gives us great hope. But at the same time, we have to factor in the fact that individuals, if they are themselves alienated within themselves, if they're strangers to themselves on a psychological level, then unfortunately the black sorcery can work its magic again. There's always going to be a Mark II tyranny, because of the individual is not a whole being within inside himself. He's still putting his faith in other people. His life is entirely motivated and changed and affected by what other people say, do, and think, including the society around him, you see. And this is not the way to gain a truly spiritualized, sovereign civilization, which was the plan. That's why we're all here on this planet. We're not just here on this planet to simply be altruistic and create a better mechanistic society, or even a more easygoing sort of society. We're here to spiritually develop, and that can only happen on an individual level. This is the paradox. You may fix everything. You may decorate the world and make it. In fact, isn't that the very motive of the globalists themselves? That they want to make everything safer and cleaner and brighter and longer living and all of that. See, this is the whole thing. The ingredients are the same. So you could live in almost a perfect society and be desperately unhappy inside yourself. Because my focus, I mean, I can't talk about others and what they're doing, but the main focus for me is the idea of the psychic immunity of a person being whole within themselves, free within their mind. And therefore, even if that person is living in an utter tyranny, even if they happen to be incarcerated in the dungeon, they're still true, they're still full of light, they're still powerful human beings, you see. Because freedom is purely attitudinal. It will never, ever, at any time in history, ever be granted to you by an external force. No. And unfortunately, people are very affected by that. They really do believe that we just have the right person in power. You know, this is nonsense. Psychologically, this is total suicide. Because there is no right person, and there's no, and even if there was, the moment he gets power, he'll abuse it. This is the message of history. In fact, the true man, right, the man, like the Taoists have always said, the wisest man will never take the power that you're offering him, for that very reason I've said. So you have a paradox here. You have a paradox. And I don't care if you change one father, you know, one overlord, one father figure for another. Yeah, sure, the costume changes continually. But the fact of the matter is, the same dynamics is there. You know, master above, slave below. But it's not that there's not injustices that need to be fixed. And I myself work as hard as I can to let those injustices be fixed. And I think if those movements are based on great knowledge that, hey, we need to change the legal system, hey, we got to stop all of these government, you know, machinations, that's a completely different, you know, concept. And I'm behind it 100%. I'm like first in line, you know. But my knowledge of things has gone far deeper than just that. Social change comes with social change comes many other deviant qualities, you see, because again, consciousness itself is being left at the door.